Hello everyone, Tony here. It's hard to believe, but Dwayne and I started this podcast almost 1 year ago. To date, we have published over 30 episodes, have had the show downloaded over 1,200 times, and have reached 8 different countries. Through it all, we've had a great time, telling and hearing stories and diving deep into the world of human forestry. As with many projects like this, it starts as a totally different idea and morphs itself into its own entity. Tree Actions has grown and will continue to. Dwayne and I are always looking for new ways to connect and grow the community. We have opened a Patreon page which can be found by searching for Tree Actions on the Patreon website or app. A link is also posted in the show notes. Recording, producing, and publishing a podcast does not come free. And while this is truly a labor of love, and access to the podcast will always be free, we wanted to develop a way for those of you who wish to support the show to do so. For those that support the show through Patreon, you will get access to the episodes a week earlier and be able to comment should you choose. In the future, we develop more content available only on Patreon. I want to thank you all for listening and for all of you who have reached out to express your appreciation for the show. It really does mean the world to us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast, with my trusty co-host, Tony Tresselt, over in Pomeroy, Pennsylvania, and joining us today from the great state of Pennsylvania as well, Mr. Jeff Dice. Welcome, Jeff. It's great to have you on the show, Jeff, and we always kind of kick things off by asking our guests if they could just tell us their first memory or recollection of how their first tree memory, like that where you feel that you connected with trees. What's the first thing that pops into your mind?
Tony probably knows this story, and for me, my background in trees really came out of a family tragedy.
Oh, wow.
And I was 12 years old, 1968, and I took that phone call that day, and Dad had a major accident. And, it didn't take long for a 12-year-old to figure out it wasn't going to be a good day. And Mom took the call, and for the next 2.5 years, we spent a lot of time in hospitals. He had 13 operations over a 2.5 year period. I was too young at the time to fully understand what happened, but when I think back on it, and just from different maybe conversations that I heard, growing up, he was taking an elm tree down, and he was roping something off of the same area that his anchor point was, and had a catastrophic failure. Yeah. He fell probably 25, 30 feet. It was a pretty horrific accident. Another conversation from that time was, it was such a horrific accident that, his ground man ran for help. The first responder came and had a hard time even relaying to some other folks to come and help, just because of what he saw. Right. And he fell and took the full impact with his hands. Yeah. And I was told that, basically the bones in his forearm went into the ground.
Wow. Yeah.
So, that changed our life. My brother Mark, Mom, and I, you can imagine how that impacted, small business. After World War II, Dad had worked for the Davy Tree Company, learned his trade, and at some point decided to go out on his own. Small business. He had a truck, he had a chipper, little Fitchburg chipper, and a Model 10 stump machine. And what was interesting about that time, Tony knows knew my dad. He was a strong man. And as soon as he was able to get up with casts on his arms, he went back to work.
Wow.
And as a 12-year-old, my first work as a tree in the tree industry was with the pitchfork, because we would go out and dig stumps with that stump machine. And, that was an interesting time. A lot of elm trees were going down in the late 60s, early 70s. Yep. Dad had the only large stump machine in the Pittsburgh market. Now, Davy and Bartlett had large stump machines, but, I never saw them in town. And, you talk about the tree forest. Yeah. Really what happened there was all the local tree companies rallied around our family, as well as the larger family. And probably over the next 5 years, we never lost a bid for any stump removal in that area. And we covered from the High Line, probably east all the way over to Crescent. And that's how, the community rallied around us. Yeah. And, he was in the hospital, and amazingly bids were put in, because he wasn't able. Right. And so his friends, coworkers, and like I said, that's how we survived. And I dug more stumps than you can even imagine. Wow. And that was, mostly municipal work, cemeteries, and then also private work. And then, we worked for most of the major tree companies, around Pittsburgh. And like I said, he would dig stumps, 2 casts on his arms. Wow. And like I said, he had 13 operations over a 2-year period. So after an operation, as soon as he was able to get up and move, he did. Yep. And I remember at that time we also did, so I was probably, 14. There started to be a situation where he would do a tree climber for hire situation where he'd bring a climber in to do the aerial work, and then we would take it at whatever point we could, given the situation and the age of his crew. And I remember saying, hey, Dad, I think I can do that. And I was young. I was probably 15. And I remember the first tree I climbed was in our backyard. It was a medium to large size pin oak. And his comment to me was, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I was determined, because, Mark and I and Mom, our life changed at that point, and that's what you did. Yeah. And, through that whole time frame, any opportunity that we had, there was no vacations. The truck would come home, and Mark and I, our job was to unload, and he didn't even have a dump truck. So every night it was with a pitchfork. Wow. So, yeah, it was an interesting time, but it really brought us together as a family. And, as I got a little bit older, I became his hands. He would basically coach me through, and he never put me in positions that, for a kid of that age. Mostly it was small trim jobs and small removals. And then as I became more confident, things got larger. Right. It was interesting. I was telling my kids and grandchildren the story. When you get to be 16 and you get your learner's permit, and the day that document arrived in the mail, he met me on the path of our house and handed it to me and said, "Let's go." Wow. And from his perspective, that would allow him to put another crew out. Right. And so by the time I was 16, 17, I was running a crew. Wow. Now I say that in with a little bit of he basically Bob Powell was an older gentleman that had retired, and he put Bob Powell with me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. Right. And and again, as you gain experience and you gain confidence, then the projects got larger. And after high school, I went to Penn State and studied forestry. Mark went on to get a degree in geology, and but every opportunity, we would work. Basically just trying to, and that story is probably similar to a lot of startup companies. I've heard it from other folks. You just come together as family and you get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And after college, then his business started to grow, and there was a point where we were running 3 crews. That Stump machine, we wore 2 of those out.
Wow.
Over the course of that time. And they're the old Vermeer Model 10.
So tell me about that Vermeer Model 10. Give us a description of the machine and what it was like to run that thing.
Well, it was a trailer that had 2 posts for the wheels, and when you were in travel mode, the wheels would turn in, and then when you were digging, you would actually turn those posts with the wheels out. That would give you more width. And and then the motor and cutter wheel would just traverse across the rails. And
it didn't have a hinge. It more just went back and forth.
No, the newer ones have a central pivot, point. Well, this one actually went across a set of rails.
Wow.
And it could take some pretty big stumps as a result of that. And like I said, we wore 2 of those out, and then, like I said, later on, as things got progressed a little bit, and he was better, and it continued to a point where we actually started to look like a company.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting here. First of all, thank you for sharing that, and letting yourself go back to that event, because clearly it was traumatic, and it would be for anyone. So I want to thank you for doing that and sharing that like that. We've had 2 guests just recently on the show that both have survived very traumatic injuries, and one involving a tree, one involving skydiving, base jumping actually, but. The description of the recovery process and the rallying of people around them, it's common. It seems to be a common theme, at least with people in the tree world. I'm sure in other places as well. But I always wonder if those types of events. I think it either makes it or breaks it, right? Because I think sometimes people leave. That we've had people contact our office where unfortunately the father didn't survive, and then the family just dispels the business. They just leave the industry type of thing. But often they don't. They stick with it, which is what you guys did. I know your dad didn't pass away from it, but that's a pretty traumatic thing that could make you wonder. Was there ever a question around that, or did you guys just this is what we do and we're going to do it? We're going to stick with it.
Well, you had a small business that was just starting out. There really wasn't any options.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
And like I said, family, Aunt Marie and Uncle Ed would come every couple times during the week, and definitely on the weekends, and bring food. And
wow.
Financially, that was a huge hardship for us. And any small business like that, you start to have a little bit of debt, just to buy a truck and a stump machine. And he could have lost it all. And that rallying around him, and that whole idea of, we dug for every company, and a lot of that was because it was Dad, and there was no conflict of interest, like we were going to take a client or that kind of thing. That's how they supported him, and I'm hoping a lot of people hear this, and I'm sure a lot of the people that were involved in that are gone at this point, but I publicly need to thank them.
Well, that I'm sure that we're happy to help, and would do it again. And how do you feel that's influenced you? In your giving back, because you've been involved with ISA, and Was that a key factor, do you think, for you as not only as an artist
Oh,
but a volunteer?
yeah, most definitely. And a lot of that was Dad. After his accident, he was very much interested in safety and safety training, and the ISA was the natural place to obtain those kinds of that education, as well as just learning about trees in general. So Pendel as a chapter is they run a great conference, a lot of educational programs, a lot of safety training, and he became involved in that over the years after his accident, and really, the majority of the membership in Pennsylvania is in the Philadelphia and Delaware area. And at that time, in the Pittsburgh area, there really wasn't a lot of participation with the ISA. And so he made it a mission to, really kind of bring the state together, and always would encourage, other tree companies to, take advantage of what ISA would offer. And
how did your career progress into? Because I know you spent a long time at Penn State and had a pretty neat job there. Where did that transition? How did that all come to pass?
Well, it actually came out of a local tree climbing championship. Again, as part of bringing the state together, we actually had two different competitions. We had the Eastern competition, which was the main qualifying event for, ISA competition. But, really the western part of the state, I mean, we were still learning. And a couple of those early competitions were, I wouldn't call them demonstration events, but, we all were learning about the competition. And for me, and what happened was Penn State had lost their arborist in a car accident, and they were actively recruiting. And Tony, we went to the event at Eden Hall, and Dad, organized that event, and unbeknownst to me, a supervisor from the college was there, and from that time and meeting him, the guy kept asking me questions, and I wasn't sure why. And really, what happened is he was interviewing me, and I didn't even know it. And it was shortly after that they made an offer to both Chris Edson and myself, and we both. That was a great. I mean, that's where I really learned how to climb trees, is working with Chris. And so Dad was at a point in his career where he was ready to retire. He sold his business, and I ended up at University Park, and that was a great move for my family. Penn State's a very dynamic place to work. Just from a employment perspective, but also, you've got some of the best researchers in the world. I mean, anything you need, they have a lot to offer. And so it was a great move for me personally. And, so I climbed there for 12 years. And then there was a point where another opportunity came up, and I was able to move up a level and became a supervisor for the rest of the time.
Excellent. And how did you transition into involved with ITCC and eventually being chair of the International Championships?
Go ahead and repeat that, because you cut out there. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just asking how it evolved for you through the competitions to being involved with ITCC and eventually chair of that event.
Yeah. So what was it, Tony? 2004, 2005, when the event was in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, 2004 was Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2004. John Smith was the overall conference chair, and he asked me to handle the ITCC. And I'd been to local events and competed a couple times, but I'd never been to an international event. And as a result of that, me being asked to be the local organizing chair for the ITCC, I went to Montreal, and complete rookie. I'd never seen a competition like that, and so they immediately put me as a timer in the secured footlock, and I'm pretty sure we timed the world record that day. And then I watched Bettis, and if you remember that climb, after watching him just navigate through that massive tree, I was hooked. And then once the following year was the Pittsburgh event, and then I met Jasper T. Cornfield.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know that we've had Scott on the show, but we haven't had Jasper on the show. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, that's Jasper, right?
Well, that's very true to say. We've had Scott on. We haven't had his alter ego yet. That is true.
Correct.
Exactly. And Scott is an amazing recruiter, and and truthfully, I'm not sure I knew what I was getting myself into. How and at that time in the ITCC, the competition at that point was really a focus of innovation, different technique, different configurations of gear, and so as far as the rules committee, I did like a partial year training with Scott, and then the following year he was still on the committee, but he was head chair of the event at that point as well, and needed to delegate. And so I took that committee, and really during that time of evolution in climbing technique and equipment, the ITCC rules committee, I mean, we had to adapt to keep up with the change. Mm-hmm. And so I had 2 terms on that committee, and then turned that over to Tom Greenwood and his capable hands moving forward. So that was a 6.5, 7 year commitment. And then after that, helped out with the head judge role in the work climb. For me, it's always been one to help out, because I mean, where can you go and get a chance to hang with some of the most accomplished tree professionals in the world? Yeah. And it was a great experience and really had an impact on my career and really my life. Met some, lifelong friends and really kind of set the standard for safety for me as an arborist, but also as a supervisor.
You touched on the concept of the human forest and how it's affected you, not only professionally, but personally or in your life. How would you describe how trees have affected not only your professional life, but as you mentioned, your personal life? Like, in what way do you think that's had an impact on you? Or is there a way that you could kind of share with us how that's affected you?
Well, obviously it's been a passion, through my whole career. I mean, I grew up, and like I said, as soon as I was old enough to do any kind of work, when you grow up in a tree business, and as I explained earlier, and that was something that came out of just a total family need. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed climbing. Got a chance to work with Chris up at Penn State, and if you've ever seen the elm trees up there, those were impressive. Right. And I got to tell you, I was a little intimidated at first. I mean, they were amazing trees. Right. Just so how it impacted my life. I mean, I remember when I did retire from Penn State, I was really on the fence. I I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. And I remember Joan, my wife, said, Jeff, that's part of your identity. It's part of your passion.
Right.
But going into retirement, just develop a new identity, and that's what you do. And so I didn't really retire. I think I really call it free agency, and
right.
Because now you can do whatever you want, and
right.
So I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, yeah. Well, how would you say your role in the human forest changed? Like from retiring as active in the tree industry to now, active as part of the human forest and changing your identity, as you say. Can you describe that process, or what does that mean? Who are you today in relation to the human forest or even the urban forest?
You'd ask about, wanting to commit time and volunteering. During my time as a professional arborist, that was really came out of my upbringing and my experience with my father and his company, and wanted to be a part of that. And there was benefits for both. I mean, you donate your time, but also what you gain from that is more than you can even measure. Having moved forward, I guess my last international event was Washington. And there's a point where you really need to get out of the way and let some of the younger guys get a chance to make their contribution. And I've still worked in Pendle, for the local competitions, and will continue to do that in the future.
Right.
And from a retirement perspective, I still consult, and but you do it at your discretion, so to speak. You can. What's nice about retirement, and if you're able to plan well, you can charge your full rate, or you could charge nothing because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And so I've been doing both. And
yeah.
So
I get that. What you meant? You're talking about you mentioned Chris twice, and your experience climbing at Penn State in the trees. What is your most poignant memory of climbing, like either the first or when you think about climbing the Elms at Penn State? What comes to mind? Is it the view, the feeling?
Well, they were just impressive creations. I had never experienced trees of that grandeur and size and really history, and to be able to take care of them was an honor. And working with Chris, I mean, I've worked with a number of arborists in my time, but never worked with one that was as diligent and thoughtful in his approach to managing trees, and just with the work ethic that was just impressive to be around. And because we would never touch an elm except during the winter, so that, we climbed in some pretty crazy times. I mean, my joke to him was, if my pole pruner goes to 90 degrees at any time, I'm done. Because it was always windy up there, and you're in trees that are 110, 120 feet tall with 50, 60 foot off center. When you walk out a limb. It was an impressive time. I really enjoyed the short time that I was able to do that, and it was again another one of those life changes when you change from being a production arborist to being in supervision in a union environment, and they won't let you climb anymore.
Right.
That was an adjustment as well. But that was the right time for me at my career. And then you get to explore other aspects of horticulture and the whole managing of a collection of trees. And we built an arboretum. We changed the crews and the way we deploy people to include, horticulture operation, a landscape construction operation, in addition to the team that was already there and doing great work. And so that was a fun experience and change too. And Penn State was always a very dynamic environment. I mean, they were always building. There was always something going on. And, so I kind of changed from a production arborist to, the guardian.
Wow.
My line to the crew was never let a one-day event ruin 100 years of heritage.
Right.
And we were pretty strict on that, because, guys with backhoes, they don't get it.
Right.
And unless you help them understand. So.
Well, it's interesting. It just like it makes me think of the human forest concept, and like we all are. The construction crew is a plant or something that is part of the forest, and if it isn't managed, it can do damage, right? But I'm curious about how because I think it's a common problem that many people face is particularly in municipal type environments, whether it be educational or municipal or whatever, but where you have factions or silos within an organization that are responsible for things like construction, things like maintenance, things like the trees and the turf, and whether it be landscape construction or actual like digging up utility pipes, whatever. The more integrated they could be, like a forest is, I think the better it can be. And there is ways of doing things. How were you able to be a guardian and earn the respect where you were able to have influence on these other areas? Because that's what it sounds like you're able to do.
It was interesting as we were always the first team that was in on any construction.
Wow.
And that, you develop that credibility by, giving accurate information. Not all trees are the same. They're not worth the same. They don't have all the same history. Some are replaceable, some aren't.
Okay.
Some are in better health. So we would basically did a lot of assessment prior to construction. And then, once it was determined that a tree was going to, be preserved, we would guard it like a junkyard dog. And, the thing is I did, right after I retired, I kind of went on a road tour and did a lot of speaking, primarily in the botanic garden world.
Uh-huh.
And I was talking to a fair-sized audience, and I said, okay, who in your professional experience has, had your trees damaged? And what people didn't understand is contractors with heavy equipment basically are doing exactly what they're told. And unless you do your homework early and set up the parameters, whether it be through specifications and or just setting limits, really, if your trees get damaged, it was your own fault. And we were able to establish a hierarchy of different assessments of trees, and even to the point where they would change building envelopes to protect particular trees. And what was great during the major campaign for building at Penn State, because they had a Grand Destiny campaign that raised over $1.3 billion, and they went and they really upgraded facilities, and one of the great things that they did was, when I say they, the upper management team recognized very quickly that there would be trees lost.
Right.
And, so we actually had budgeting to plant new trees on campus at a stable funding level through my whole time there. So actually through some major construction, we actually increased the total number of trees on campus by a significant amount.
Right. Interesting. I'm curious how what if you can just give us an overview of the criteria to, I mean, all trees are alive and valuable, but like you said, the ones you would guard like a junkyard dog, what would get a tree to that level of protection? What would it take for it to meet that status?
when you have a facility like a major university that has a long history, there are some trees that have really been witness to that since the beginning. And at Penn State, we had a program, what we called our Heritage Tree Program. And out of a collection of like 17 or 18,000 trees, there were only like 20 or 30 that had met that designation. And, those trees were completely off limits.
Right.
And they would be protected and had value enough that would change projects. Other trees that were kind of like the up and coming, the next generation, we would assess them for their condition, their health, their species, and anything that would identify them as an asset to the university that needed to be protected. The way that system worked was the assistant vice president for physical plant had the final say. We would give recommendations on what trees were to be preserved, but really, the final decision is what's in the best interest of the university. And so and it rarely happened, but on a couple of occasions, it made sense to take down a mature tree in order to further the mission of the university, into the future. Right. And it was a very dynamic environment. And I had a great relationship with all the contractors on campus, because we all had a common goal. We needed to preserve and protect a historic collection of trees, as well as, build world-class facilities so that, we could meet the educational mission of the university.
Yeah. So what do you think it was that made that happen? Was it just like personality types? It was just the right alignment, or was it the way you went about it? I don't think, obviously you're not suggesting you take full credit for it all, but like, that's a pretty special thing. That's a pretty special thing. What do you think made that work like that?
Well, again, it's a team effort. The arborist crew and the way they conducted themselves, but I held them to a high standard as far as what we, the way we managed it. And the first time that I encountered it, when you see the layout stakes on a construction site, and typically they're offset from like a curb line or something that's to be built. And I was a brand new supervisor. I'd only been in the job a couple months, and there was a big project that was going on to upgrade a road network within the central part of the campus. And when I got the phone call, I mean, if I could show you a picture, you'd be amazed. They had already done the excavation. All there was this network of damaged roots to the point where any arborist that would have looked at it would have made the same exact decision I did. That tree's got to go. Right. I mean, we're not going to, that's something you can't bury. And when you have 47,000 students changing classes every 55 minutes, I mean, the chances of killing somebody was really high. Right. And, so I cut the tree down. Yep. On my own authority. Right. Well, you can imagine how that went. Wow. With the upper management folks, the president of the university. And so the directive that I was given is that you must come up with a way of assessing these trees in a document form that could be provided to the construction folks as well as the designers prior to the start of any construction, even when you're first considering it. And we did that, and that process was hugely valuable, and really preserved a lot of trees on campus. Because when you get into a situation where you're doing tree preservation, it's a negotiation. Because I always wondered, if you ask me to do the same project, how would I do it? Right. If I had to, put glazing on the side of a building with a crane, or dig a foundation of a new building, 40 feet into the ground. You got to be able to do that work. Right. And so we would look at ways to preserve while facilitating construction. And
Well, that's amazing. And I know it's not completely unique to Penn State, but it's not the rule in my experience. In my travels, and we do a lot of work with municipalities, that there's so often such a massive disconnect between the forestry crew and the streets crew, for example, or whatever. Like they just don't really connect at all. And in fact, for some reason or not, there's often animosity or dislike because they're always, you guys are always mad at what we do, and vice versa, right? And but you get a lot more done with coopetition or cooperation, right? And I think that somehow you were able to preserve that. And I think professionalism goes a long way. But interesting. The first event was, look, I'm cutting this tree down. It's just happening. It created a bit of a startle response, and it paved the way for what happened in some ways.
yeah, and my whole plan on it was not to create an adversarial relationship. You work more with again, because your job is to facilitate construction. And I knew it was working when I would start to have contractors call me and say, "Oh, wow, we can't do this,"
Wow.
and it was fantastic. And they knew that if they wanted to work there, they had to. That was part of their expectation, and it worked. It worked really well. But it's something that you have to continue to work at. The whole time you can't let up on it. You got to set that standard and follow through on it.
I think that's a really interesting perspective you shared there, Jeff. Is that it was that part of your job was to facilitate those projects,
Absolutely,
not stand in their way, or it wasn't just completely tree focused. Again, you were forest focused. You were focused on the whole collective, not just this tree.
right. I remember the first well, it was the second time I had a run in with a contractor, and they took a dump truck and they drove it down a sidewalk, and the dump truck operator, again trying to do what he was asked to do, ran up on the root flare of the tree, and unfortunately for him, it basically took all the bark probably up 4 or 5 feet on the tree, and just peeled it right off of a red oak.
Oh.
And so we assessed the damage, and I assessed the contractor for the value of the damage, and he said, "Well, geez, for that kind of money, I'll just cut the tree down and I'll give you the money." And I said, "Well, hold on." I assessed the damage. I didn't assess the value of the tree.
Right.
And he was resisting. And I said, "Well, you just need to understand I'm pretty good in court." And it was interesting from that point on, before that contractor would even consider coming on campus, we were the first phone call.
Wow.
And, they were one of the prime contractors that were successful in obtaining bids for a lot of the projects. And we, over time, it started out a little bit of a bumping into each other, but, as we worked more together, we were both had the same goal and mission in mind to preserve. And while they got their good building built, and we kept our trees. So,
Jeff, we had a conversation once about why Penn State would spend so much money on their trees, and the answer you gave me was really probably my first glimpse into like urban forestry and the value of urban forestry. And if you could just describe a little bit, why did Penn State have such a big tree budget? Why did they value those trees so deeply beyond the historical significance?
It was widely believed, and not just by Penn State, but through a lot of facilities managers, that people make their decision on whether they want to attend a university or spend time in any particular place within the first 15 minutes of walking on campus. And so the quality of the grounds maintenance, the impact that the trees would bring, it signifies the history of the longevity of the facility, and we took that very seriously. with regard to how people viewed the university as a whole. And, so whether it was, through our tree management, our horticulture displays, general grounds maintenance, the cleanliness of the facility, it all had an impact on whether people actually wanted to come. And, if you look at the application statistics for the university, every year, I mean, they were one of the leading universities in the country that, as far as people wanting to attend there. And while a lot of it had to do with the quality of programs and the educational aspect of it, really just the feel of the actual environment and location had a huge impact on whether people wanted to come, because they're spending big money to come there. There's no doubt. And, it added to that level of quality with, high-end buildings, high-end facilities, and then, just the grounds.
Interesting.
And, the crews worked very hard to manage that.
Interesting. So they actually it was actually part of almost the marketing strategy or the inherent value
Absolutely.
Of the university wasn't just in, I'm reminded, Tony, of data doesn't matter. It's not just the value of the education and the quality of the instruction, but like where you actually have to live for those 4 years or however long you're attending, and the quality of life. It's all impacted, and certainly something people consider for sure. Because you could technically do the same thing online these days, right? But it's not the same.
Yeah, and I think that just the whole the University Park State College, the town itself is built around the university, and it's really in many respects a bubble. It's very idyllic, and you're right. When people, or parents, when you send your children to university, one, it is a big financial investment, and two, you don't want to have to worry about them, right? You want them to feel safe, and I think the trees were a huge part of that, especially the elm collection and the things that were all there, and that part of the world made it. And I say this not as just a Penn State alum myself, but it is kind of a cool place, and the trees were a huge part of it. Not just because in my time as an arborist, running around speaking and doing different trainings, I've been on a ton of different similar sized university campuses, everything from Alabama. Like it amazed me. I was on the University of Alabama campus, and I drove in looking for a conference hall or something, and it had a different feel about it. Then you went underneath this railroad bridge, and the attitude changed. And what I'd found out is that first section that I drove into had been hit by a tornado like 5 years before. There were no mature trees, and all the buildings were new. When you got into the older part of the campus, the feel of the campus really changed, and I think that Penn State, with the trees and with the historical significance and everything they did for the grounds, you said, all of it was huge. Just it made that. And for me, that was my first big glimpse into, as being a production arborist and just a dude that climbs trees and cuts on trees, like urban forestry. I don't know nothing about that. I was too busy looking at trees, not the forest. But that was my first glimpse into wait, maybe there is something to this urban forestry stuff. It does change the way people perceive things.
You guys have mentioned the elms and the historical nature of them, and unfortunately, I'm not as aware of that, and maybe some of our listeners wouldn't be either. What is the story of the elms at Penn State? What gives them that historical significance from the time they were planted, obviously, to now?
Yeah, the initial planting was in 1890.
Wow.
And then with a follow-up planting in 1920, and it was interesting, as the young the Pennsylvania Farmers College grew and started to be head toward being a university. I mean, it was a land grant, one of the land grant universities of the United through the there's one in every state, and
Yep.
Very early on they made I thought was a historic decision that they basically laid out a landscape plan for the university as a whole, so that as the facilities expanded, they could also install the landscape that was going to complement it. And so those trees, again, the 1890 ones were probably 50, 60 inches in diameter, 110, 120 feet tall.
Wow.
Some of the larger ones were 150, 140 foot spreads.
Wow.
And it really created an area that was, it was just majestic. Now in 2007, now you can imagine how this impacted me as a supervisor. We all were in Hawaii, if you remember that fantastic time.
Yeah.
And Joan and I, in addition to that time with the ITCC, took a few extra days. Actually, we were over there 3 weeks total.
Right.
So the competition plus then some time, just enjoying some time together.
Yeah.
And when I got home, I was like, "Hey guys, what's going on here? I'm seeing some stuff." And they said, "Hey Jeff, wait, we're aware of it. We're not sure what it is." And it was Alan Sam's crew. With the Borough State College that actually did the final assessment, and it turned out to be elm yellows. And we went into an outrageous time where I had to help the university community understand that this legacy planting of trees was not going to be there for much longer. And probably one of the best decisions I made at the time was I would not allow a tree to be cut down. And it turned out that seasonally it worked out well. From a disease management perspective, I know Chris and the crew were really, they weren't real happy with me at the time because I held them up and I wouldn't let them cut a tree down until everyone within the university community knew what was going on. And we went on a road show where we started with all the facility coordinators. We went to the alumni council. The president had a group that would advise him, the university president. I think we did, I think it was 12 different public meeting type events so that everyone knew. And by the time we actually had to start cutting trees down, people were coming up to me. It was like a funeral.
Right.
And they would come up and shake my hand and say, "I'm sorry for your loss."
Wow.
And we actually, in a 2-year period, we lost probably 80 trees. There was 43 one year. I'd have to look at the old data, but so from a crew perspective, my first move as a supervisor was to call Scott Profit and Tony, and we did the crane school. Because I knew there was going to be a lot of dead trees. And given my history with dead elm trees, as I explained before, I was very concerned.
Right.
I didn't want to get anybody hurt. And so we commissioned a crane school. Tony and Scott came in, and I opened it up to any arborist that was interested within the area, within the state. And I don't know how many people were there, Tony. It was a lot. And we set up a situation where we actually brought a crane in and allowed them to do the work.
Wow.
And were trees that we knew had to come down. And, through that time, then the other part of it is, okay, how are you going to restore this area? And I was pretty concerned. You can imagine the conversations with the landscape architects. And I need a landscape design to restore this area following this, disease disaster.
Right.
And, so I was getting pushback. Wait a minute, is this a 10 years? Is this going to happen over 20 years? I said, how about 2? and again, that's another way where the university community rallied to solve a pretty significant problem. The University Tree Commission, the campus planning design at Penn State, all the landscape architects, Derek Culp, Tom Flynn, Gordon Thoreau, all the upper mid. And what was cool about it is because we let everyone know what was going to happen. There wasn't any shock of it. And like I said, people were bought into it, and we removed what had to be removed aggressively and started to replant immediately. And if you walk on campus today, most people won't even know.
Wow.
I told one of the upper management guys I bought 2 tons of fertilizer and I knew how to use it. and I had one of the techs. I told him, I said, I want to see 4 feet of growth a year. And he walked into my office and he had this leaf. I mean, it was as big as a dinner platter. And he put it on my desk. He says, "Does that work for you, boss?" And yeah. So when you preserve and you become the guardian of a collection of trees, sometimes you have to manage change.
Right.
And we were fortunate to have the skilled staff and the support to be able to do it very quickly. And even though it was a bad situation, it worked out pretty well. And then we took all the wood that had to be salvaged. We had it sawn up. I had 2 friends from forestry school have a Lewis Lumber and Lewis Lumber Products. Mark Lewis and Keith Atherholt. We got together and we sawed all that wood. And the Penn State Alumni Association actually set up a web store. And when I retired, we had sold $1.2 million worth of like gifts, everything from the little box or
Really?
picture frame all the way up to like rocking chairs that were worth $2,000.
Wow.
And, it was and what that did was, again, out of tragedy came a positive situation. We took that money and endowed it, and essentially that'll fund tree planting for on into the future.
Wow. So they actually, well, that's, and people could, own a memory of that.
Yeah, I think what you kind of need to understand, if you know that part of the state, like when Jeff was talking about his dad's accident, when Dutch elm disease came through in the 60s, between the death of the elm trees and the death of chestnut blight, the forest in the eastern United States and Pennsylvania changed dramatically. Those 2 trees probably made up, what would you guess, Jeff, 60% of the forest?
Yeah, easily.
So much like when a wildfire comes through an area, which people are familiar with today, it totally changes the ecosystem. Well, the Dutch elm disease and chestnut blight did the very same thing, just over a longer period of time. And, and listening to Jeff tell the story of Harry, his dad, it's like it was a natural disaster in every respect. It was just much slower because it affected people's lives, because Jeff's dad wouldn't have been out there cutting that elm tree down if it hadn't been for Dutch elm disease. And it really, really impacted.
Correct.
I mean, in the city of Pittsburgh, there were elm trees, like there were just whole streets that were nothing but elm trees. And literally in a year, they all died and had to come down because they were literally falling down in the city. So it was like, it was almost a gold rush of tree work at that point. And just everybody was doing it, and it just really needed to be done. And I don't think people understand that when you get a blight or something that comes through and is so selective, how much it changes a community. And the corollary to that was State College as university tended to be a bit of a bubble. So these were the last of these majestic elm trees left in the state. It was, they were like a monument to what the state forest used to be, not only for the university. So it was really,
that's right.
For me, it was when I started thinking about it and hearing the stories, and even Chris, and Chris has some great stories about elm tree removals, and we'll get him on too, Dwayne. I just haven't caught up with him yet. It's just, it's just the way those trees and the sudden death of those trees impacted the community was every bit as impactful as a forest fire, but just over a much longer time frame, which in some respects can be worse, right?
Yep.
Well, it just gets more to that whole, it's more than just an economic impact. Like there's a spiritual or a sentimental quality that is inherent to the trees. And, it's why I still I use the analogy of the human forest, because to me, they're not separated. Like trees are part of our human forest. We're part of that forest. Call it what you will. But the feeling that, being amongst trees, or that whether it's in an urban setting, whether they've been planted trees or whether you're in the forest itself, obviously we know that trees release, terpenes and chemicals that literally calm us. And they do that even in the urban setting, And in a canopy, I've been really curious to know, because anyone that's climbed a tree, as all of us here have, but anyone that's ever you get there, I mean, obviously there's the fatigue and the effort it takes, which is part of it. But there's any arborist has sat there, and you feel part of something that is, it's almost an element of adventure and exploration or expedition, even though, because it's just not inhabited commonly by people, right? Like, you're above in this realm, and there's a sense there. I can only imagine what it must have been like in those elms, for you being part of Penn State prior to their removal and everything. And what a unique perspective that arborists going to bring, because we not only look at it from the ground, but from the canopy as well, and what it's like to be up there, right? But it's true, they bring such a different element. Go ahead.
Sorry, what was interesting, when you talk about that connection to trees, I just got a call the other day, and, Penn State still does call.
Okay.
And they were asking a question about a tree that had been named. And it was just one of those crew names where we had a connection to that particular tree. And there was a lot of them around where you'd worked on them enough that, they were part of the family.
Yeah.
Your job was to protect them. And when I would say, the U-House elm, everyone on the crew knew exactly what I was talking about. And it was because it was just such a magnificent, one of God's creations,
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and there were a number of those. And it was funny because when you retire, some of that, corporate history is lost. And they were like, this particular tree, why was it named? And I said, it wasn't like it was, commemorated for someone in particular. It was the crew name for that particular plant because, again, it was family.
Yeah.
It was something that you managed and touched many times throughout its life. And, and I'm sure there's a lot of other facilities, parks and municipal plantings and, other college campuses where that occurs just naturally anyway. And it's that connection, because there's a reverence for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just because they've been there for so long, they're a part of the history. And, your job as an arborist is to protect and guard it and, pass it on into the future.
There is something with people, it seems, for some reason, and I mean this genuinely because I really don't know what the reason is, but I know it's common. I think it's internationally. It transcends language, and that is a reverence or a respect for an old living thing. And I think the only thing older is probably mountains, right? Like earthen structures like mountains, but trees. Mountains aren't as alive in the sense that a tree is. And to have once a tree's old, something that outlives us by so many, many years, like in decades or, centuries even, without problem. The oldest living things on the planet, there's just something about it. It doesn't matter what culture you're in. And what do you think that is? Like, why is it that we have that reverence? Just because we can't do it at all? Is that why? Or... I'm curious,
It's just the respect, for the resource, and
I think it's a bit of jealousy.
It really is.
I think it's jealousy. We want to live that long and we can't, so we have to go.
Well, it might be part of it, right? Like it might be part of it. Like we can't. You just can't do it. Like you can't. We can't. And I think it's also there's something about. And I think it magnifies as you get older, because you think back a little bit more on your past when you're older, not regretting it, but just reflecting, and how something could, like, what it has seen, because that's what we reflect on, or I can speak for myself. I think about what the tree looked like, or what my landscape was like, or what my friends were like, and as people pass on, but the tree's still there. the tree's as big as old as it ever was, and it's not even close to going anywhere, and it's going to be there long after I'm gone, and maybe that's part of it, right? Maybe. I've had a similar experience the first time I discovered the age of lobsters, or how long. I remember learning one time that for every pound for a lobster is it's 10 years old. The most common lobster served in restaurants is 2.5 pounds. So they're 20 to 25-year-old creatures, right? And I thought, man, that's quite that. And it also helped me realize why there's no lobster farms. There's all sorts of other farms. There's even tree farms, but there's no lobster farms. But like, it's just something about thinking, wow, that thing, like something that's lived that long and then to be harvested seemed, if a deer lived 50 years, I might be hesitant to harvest it. But I don't, I do hunt but maybe if it was really, really old, it'd feel different. I don't know, because I don't like cutting down old trees. And I also found it interesting, Jeff, you mentioned that trees had, like, there were trees that were guarded and protected, and then trees that they were close to that list, and then trees that not that would be, you'd be willing to sacrifice for the construction, like rather than take these, let's move over it here, which means we'll just take these, and that that you would prioritize that.
Yeah, and they went through a rigorous assessment. I was starting to talk about they renovated East Halls, and I'm told it's one of the largest student housing complexes in the country, and it was built originally in the 70s, and it was in definite need of upgrade, both as far as all the support aspects of electric and internet and that kind of stuff, but also in the preferences of what modern students expect in their housing. And so it was a very significant restoration. And the way I explained it to some folks is the trees that make it through this, make it through the rigorous process of assessment, will then be the future heritage trees, down the road. And we took that very seriously, but again, you still have to facilitate the upgrade of the facilities to support the academic mission moving forward. And I think with the trees that made it through that construction process, they will anchor that landscape long into the future and give the overall feel Tony was explaining earlier, moving forward. And then when you add, the dynamic of new plant material to complement that, I mean, it makes for a special place. And when you walk across campus and you look at the historic buildings, you look at the old trees, and and then the installation of other plant material, it just makes for a place that people want to be. And
I think, Jeff, I was struck earlier on in our talk about your relationship with the different departments, I guess I'll use the word, in the university, and something that I heard in what you were saying was a respect, and I think that's what you're continuing to talk about, and it's having not just the respect for each other in your different job respects as far as what you have to do, but then also the respect for the tree, and you were able to somehow pass that on. You're able to get everyone to respect each other, and the trees were just part of that, and that's really a special thing. And I think that's, maybe that's really what it is about old trees, is the respect. They just demand or command it
that's
at
correct.
the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, you might be onto something, Dwayne. Maybe we respect them as we learn to respect them a little bit as we get a little bit older ourselves, because we know how hard living is.
Yeah.
Living was easy when I was 21.
Exactly.
Ain't so easy now.
Well, and you can't, a problem is might be the same for the tree. If we could talk to them, like what it must be like to be able to sustain that structure. I know it's what it's like to sustain this old structure. Imagine if it was a 400-year-old tree, like that tree's going, man, you got no idea, man. And how would you? Can you imagine trying to live that long? I don't know if I'd wanna. I shouldn't say that, but you know what I mean. It's yeah, and obviously we can't help but anthropomorphize, trees, and we always are giving them human qualities, like when we do give them a name. Uh, where I'm really curious. You got me really thinking about the name thing. How many named trees are still on campus that you would go and say that's such and such? And can you
I don't know
tell
if I
us
can
about
give you
some
a
of
number,
that?
but there's a lot. There's a lot of them.
So what are the first five
Well,
that come to your mind?
some of them were, like the Pew Street Mall and some of the largest elms. And
Pew Street.
if I said the Pew Street Mall, everyone knew that was that collection of elm trees. There was another one where there was a physical plant upper administrator that used to walk this one walkway because it just was just a spectacular place with large mature trees, and they called it Spearley's Walk. And we had Mussey's Oak and yeah, there's a number of them. And, Mussey was a previous peer of mine, a supervisor that, if you got near that tree, you and he would have some definite problems. And he guarded that tree enough that we named it after him, and
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's
Mussey's
common
Oak.
with other crews across the United States and in the world. And again, it's some of that's the respect that comes from being able to work with something that's that spectacular and has attained that age. And again, I always viewed it as an honor to be able to work with it. And if you have some small impact to it moving forward and preserve it into the future, you've done a good thing.
Well, that's just a beautiful thing as well, and I think it's something that we all hope to inspire and strive to pass on, and hope people listening to this will remember that or think about that, because it's the honor it is to be able to work on a tree, or to be able to care for a tree or protect a tree, or to have a say in what happens in and around a tree. Like, what an incredible responsibility. Really. I remember Jack Phillips, a friend of ours that would teach. I met him through Dr. Shigo. He would really, with quite reverence, talk about how significant it is to plant trees and care for trees, because of the impact that they have on community and the people and the human forest. And we're that connection. We're the Loraxes, if you will. We're the ones that speak, and on behalf of what's best for the trees, and help people understand that and create that connection. What a cool thing, and important thing, And you clearly have done a stellar job of that, and hopefully people can learn, and maybe one day you can somehow write out or explain how you did that, the playbook of how you develop that respect for the trees with the people and everybody you work with, because that's what you seem very successful in having done.
Yeah, but that idea is not unique to me, or I mean that I'm sure that happens around the world. I don't know if there's a playbook. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I do, and I really respect your humility as well, because I don't know that you had the answer, and I think it's unique, and it's sometimes I guess I think of it this way: how many times have you been on a crew, or have you in your career? I know I can think back to a few times when I was in production tree work where I was part of a crew that everything that summer was the summer of perfection. Like, we would pull up to a job and everybody knew what they were going to do. You knew how to, and you had fun. You were efficient. You enjoyed it. There was no quibbling, and it just, and then it just all clicked. Sometimes maybe that's what happens too, right?
No, I agree 100%. And I've been, through my career, blessed to be able to work with an amazing group of people, very skilled. The crew at Penn State and all the folks there, but also, the same thing would occur when you'd go to an ITCC event. You would have, some of the most accomplished tree professionals in the world come together to put on a safe competition. And we would all come from different parts of the world, gather. It was a total team effort. And there was a horticulture professor at Penn State, and his analogy was more to fundraising. And he said, if you're trying to accomplish a goal like that, his analogy was like loading a big log on the back of a truck. He said, if one or two people try to do it, you just can't.
Right.
But, if you get 20 guys together, you just pick it up and throw it on. And, that's kind of the way I always felt, going to an ITCC event, all the preparation, with the rules committee and everything. And then, coming into the actual event and getting to work with noted professionals, and then, to ensure the safety of all the competitors. It was an honor. And, it's something I'll always remember. It was a highlight of my career.
Well, it was a great to be part of. I was under your leadership at that time as part of the ITCC, it was always a you brought that gift that you have into that atmosphere as well. That clearly you had and developed also at Penn State. So whatever it was in your upbringing that brought it right from that first tragic experience, and maybe it was. How much connection to that may have had a lot to do with it, Jeff, and experiencing the benefit of the kindness of others and needing that and being able to accept that. And you were able to experience that, and you've carried it through. Well, Tony, I didn't realize how much, I know you guys are in Pennsylvania and in the same state, so clearly you would know each other, but I didn't know that you knew Jeff's father like you did, as well as you did. I wasn't aware of that.
Yep. I didn't interact a lot with Harry off and on. Harry was always a guy you could always ask him, you were going to get an honest answer. You probably might not like it, but you would get an honest answer. So he was a great resource for when, you needed that. And, when it comes to, you look at there's in an area, locality, when you have tree climbing comps, or at least in the arborist world, there's always has to be that one person that is the driving force behind it. And Jeff's dad, Harry, was that guy for the western part of Pennsylvania. And,
wow.
It's the Pennsylvania-Delaware chapter, but people like William Buckley described Pennsylvania, politically speaking, he says it's Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between. And that's very true. And it was, for a very long time in the arborist world, that was very true. You had the guys out around Pittsburgh, you had the guys around Philadelphia, and then somewhere in between was no man's land. But Harry was that man that bound those two together, and was a driving force. I think through tree climbing competitions, just his involvement in volunteerism, and like I said, my limited exposure, because Harry was fading as I was coming up, was still a driving force. But I always remember him being said, if you needed an answer, Harry'd give you one. You might not like it, but it was an honest answer. And you could take it to the bank, right? It was correct. So it was good stuff.
He was a master sergeant in the Army Reserve, and he could get stuff done. There's no doubt. And if you were on the symposium floor during the conference and had any money in your pocket, and he had the 50-50 raffle tickets, and
oh yeah, I know those guys. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for, I have to say I'm when you started talking in the very beginning about your first memory and connection to trees, I was taken a bit aback, but I seem to have, I had forgotten about it. I'm sad to say, but I have some memory that I never heard it in the detail you shared it with today. So I want to thank you for that once again. And it was just a really great story because it was so honest and real. I know it was a tragedy and it was difficult, but it, I think, like as we've said, it really did shape you, of course. And thanks for the whole thing, the taking the time to talk with us and share. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you guys asking, and hopefully there's some young guys out there that, if you have an opportunity, get involved with the ITCC, because the benefits for you are going to be immense, and highly encourage it. And the three of us, it's been a great life experience that had an impact pretty much to everyone, I think, that's been involved in it, and highly encourage it.
Hello everyone, Tony here, and I'm letting you know that Dwayne and I will be taking Tree Actions live. On March 27th and 28th of this year, we will be at Arbor Expo at the New Jersey Convention and Exposition Center in Edison, New Jersey. Come join us for the tree industry's fastest growing trade show and conference. This year features 19 education sessions, 2 of which I will be delivering, as well as all the exhibitors and demos you can expect from an excellent trade show and conference. We will look forward to seeing you there.